Welcome back to the Open Web Forum at CogX, curated by Fabric Ventures. For the second panel of the day, we have sustainability, open web innovations. Our panelists will be answering the questions on whether the decentralized world of crypto and blockchain can assist us in creating better sustainability, and what is it doing about its own sustainability. Moderating is the fantastically talented Mike Butcher, MBE, editor-at-large of TechCrunch. He has interviewed the likes of Tony Blair, Dmitry Medvedev, and many other prominent thought leaders. Not only that, he co-founded the Europa's Awards for European startups, the nonprofits TechVets and TechVGs, and the co-working network Tech Hub. Over to you, Mike.
Thanks very much. Well, I hope you're having a nice sunny afternoon. Certainly it's sunny in the UK. As you can tell from my complexion, I've been taking advantage of the weather. And so I hope, thanks very much for joining us if you are joining us. I'm going to introduce our panelists, and we'll get them up live right now, I think. But my name is Mike Butcher. I'm editor-at-large of TechCrunch, and we cover obviously startups, tech, venture capital, AI, blockchain, you name it, we cover it. And I've been doing that in Europe since 2007. Before, and I don't want to mention how long. But the question we're going to be looking at today is the whole issue of blockchain, crypto, and whether or not the decentralized world that these things live in can assist the world in creating better sustainability. What is it also doing about its own sustainability? There's an increasing amount of debate about whether or not crypto is just burning up way too much CO2 in its own right to stay in order to keep running effectively. So let's get our people up, and I'm delighted to introduce Áslaug Magnúsdóttir, who's the founder and CEO of Katla. Now Katla is a startup which is linking the world of blockchain and the fashion world. Áslaug, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
But we'll get our other guests up in a second, but I'd love to hear from you quickly for about a minute about what Katla is, what it does, and what it hopes to achieve.
Absolutely. So Katla is a direct-to-consumer sustainable fashion brand. We launched in January of 2020, and we have taken a very holistic approach to sustainability, and we want to leverage the latest in technology to support that mission. And so some of the things that this entails, just to give a little context, the fashion industry is a $2.5 trillion industry that is responsible for 10% of carbon emissions and is the second most water polluting industry in the world. So this is an extremely important industry to tackle. One of the big issues in the industry is the overproduction that happens every season, so which is on average 30 to 40%. So we are working with an on-demand manufacturing model, which is quite unique in the industry. We also feature unique tracking numbers on every item that we produce, and there we are tying into blockchain. And we offer a resale and recycling program at the end. So that's just a little bit about the brand, but overall a very holistic approach to sustainability supported by technology.
Amazing, thank you very much. And let's also get our other panelists up. Alessandra Sollberger is founder and CEO of Top Tier Impact. Top Tier Impact is a fascinating group of investors and technology founders who are fascinated and interested in helping the world deal with the climate crisis. But Alessandra, you'll be able to explain it better than me. So please, over to you.
Thank you, Mike. Yes, Top Tier Impact is the leading global ecosystem of impact investors, entrepreneurs, corporate leaders, famous public figures, like all dedicated to impact and sustainability. And the way that we define impact is as a positive paradigm change that has sustainability and equality embedded in the way that investments are made and companies are run. So in other words, we really cover all the economic sectors and all areas of investments that are embedding this new paradigm, right? That are embedding sustainability in the way that things run. So yeah, we have a very active private community. We have various units on the investing side of things and on the strategy side of things as well, because as we are all seeing now, sustainability is not treated anymore as a nice to have, but there is real regulation that has been coming in, and it's top of various agendas and all companies. And so we kind of like tackle the sector from different angles.
Well, we want to hear more about what Top Tier thinks about some of these subjects in just a moment. But next up on our panel is Illia Polosukhin, who's the co-founder of Near Protocol. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with Near Protocol, it's considered one of the hottest blockchain startups out there at the moment, and certainly part of this new wave of what's known as decentralized finance, or DeFi. Illia, thank you very much for joining us. And I gather you're joining us all the way from Shanghai in China.
Yes, indeed. Hello, everyone. Yeah, it's really great to be here.
So, Illia, could you just tell us a little bit more about what Near Protocol does and what it hopes to achieve?
For sure, yeah. So Near Protocol in general is a blockchain protocol. It is actually climate neutral, and we can go into that. And in general, we're providing a platform and infrastructure that allows developers to build decentralized applications. And through that, we believe kind of the way we built it, the way we grow in the ecosystem, we want to pretty much change how people are controlling their assets, controlling their data, controlling the governance of the platforms they're using. And so pretty much we're providing infrastructure, and then the kind of the ecosystem at large is building this new way of kind of people can interact with the world, which what blockchain is allowing. And we're really excited to see how kind of mass adoption come, right? So to do that, we've built scalable infrastructure, we build a lot of kind of usability, and obviously in the long term, we want to make sure that this is all sustainable. So we've been focused on making sure that the infrastructure is climate neutral, that the ecosystem is climate neutral, and then longer term that people who are building on top of us are also thinking about this and incentivized to be kind of sustainable as well.
Fantastic. Thanks very much, Illia. And well, I guess we're going to have to deal with this, the elephant in the room to begin with, I think. And when we discuss this subject of blockchain and sustainability, there's always a lot of controversy about whether or not it is sustainable, it isn't, how much electricity is it using. Alessandra, I know that you've got some strong opinions, and I know you've got a few ideas about whether or not it's something that we should be talking about, whether or not it really is a thing. And certainly I know the mainstream press, certainly in the UK, I know is often citing figures about how unsustainable Bitcoin mining is, for instance. What are some of your views on this subject?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. So when you look at the world right now, we are across more than 40 countries with our activities, and we gather so much data, so much kind of like insight on what impact leaders are doing. And I feel that we managed to find the needle in the haystack with accusing the blockchain space and BTC of producing so many emissions like it does, that's for sure. But there is a laundry list of other more important issues that need to be tackled in industries such as Oslo's space, the fashion industry. And, the list is very long. So if we had time to find all the needles in the haystack, that would be great, but we don't, because net zero energy targets, and let's not even talk about like how things are going, but net zero targets for most countries are within a 9-year time frame right now. So we don't have time for needles in the haystack is the executive summary. And, we could talk about how at the end of the day, when you look also at how mining works for proof of work, so for Bitcoin mining, and the way that it's structured, the incentives really are to make it as cheap as possible. And so renewables come into the picture so much more naturally out of these incentives than in other industries as well, because they're also such a bigger part of the entire kind of cost structure compared to other industries again. And so I find that between the way that this works and the incentives for the operators themselves on how to go about this, on how to lower costs, right, on how to improve the way they do this, and also the dynamics at large of the industry itself, because proof of work is just one of the ways in which you can validate transactions on protocols. I think that we are missing the bigger picture, both in terms of how the technology works and in terms of what needs to be tackled as a top item on the sustainability agenda.
Well, of course, you mentioned proof of work there, and the sort of, just in case any watchers or viewers or listeners don't know, proof of work is obviously when you're running computers hot to make to mine Bitcoin versus another version which is coming along down the track called proof of stake, which is where the computers create a consensus in them amongst themselves without needing to run hot, as it were, and requiring lots of power and energy. But Alessandra, just quickly before I flip over to Illia, actually, inside your network, Top Tier Impact, you have some very influential people in there. But is there not a sort of debate amongst them themselves about whether or not crypto and blockchain, should be, sucking up all of this energy in the first place?
Yeah, you'd be surprised, because given the importance of other issues that are on the agenda from a sustainability perspective, from an energy consumption perspective, from achieving net zero, it's kind of like, sure, we could talk about this, but there are way more important things to be tackled. And I find that over and over, like with all the investors we have in the community, I poll them, like anecdotally in our conversations, about their views. And this tends to be the approach. This tends to be the way it's seen. And then I think that we'll talk about it later anyway on this panel, but there are so many positive things that blockchain technology itself delivers from a sustainability perspective. So that tends to be the more common view of impact investors around the world.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to, I want to hear more about, certainly from Áslaug, about how we're going to apply this stuff to the real world. But firstly, Illia, you are obviously running a so-called sustainable mining operation. Perhaps that's why you're in China. We'd love to hear more about that. But let's hear from you. I mean, do you think that, do you think that this is a misnomer, this argument about blockchain and crypto mining sucking up all of these resources, and how do you think it can make itself sustainable?
So I think there's definitely multiple components. I think the component that Alessandra mentioned is definitely true, that there's so much other stuff that's like way worse and is not focused at all on this space. And so, like, I think we definitely need to, like, overall as a space and as community, we should be focused on a lot of that things, and we'll talk about that. I think if we're talking specifically about kind of crypto infrastructure, the proof of stake, which is already here, I think like most of the blockchains that have launched in the last 2 or 3 years are proof of stake. They are hundreds of thousands of times more, use less energy than Bitcoin, and 20 to 50,000 times less than Ethereum, right? So Near, for example, is like 200,000 times less energy than Bitcoin. And from this perspective, right, like that's already pretty much reduces the impact almost to zero. Like we actually did evaluation. So for our climate neutral kind of work, we did evaluation how much energy is used and how much also CO2 produced from this. And actually, and we also measured like how much our team, flights, travel, commute, all those things, like products we use, kind of all the subsequent things. And so the energy use contributes to less than 1% of the total CO2 emission in our collective in general, right, across multiple teams. And so that is a reality already now. Now, that said, like Bitcoin is still running, very kind of inefficiently. There's a lot of like cheap energy that's very dirty, like in many places in the world, and people are looking for it because there's incentives for that. I think from my perspective, kind of Bitcoin in general, like it's going to continue being there, but like the reason why I never kind of like the proof of work is because it's just inefficient, right? Like it's not that, yes, it kind of optimizes for security in some sense of security, but it's inefficient. It's kind of, by doing exactly the same amount of work, using more energy, the more successful the project becomes, right? And so this is just by definition efficient. This is by definition this is not how humanity operates, right? We're always trying to optimize things, not become, waste more energy to do the same work.
But
so I think
sorry, do you want to finish your point?
Well, I'm just, even Ethereum, for example, they've been talking about proof of stake for like since they launched, right? And Vitalik have actually mentioned like exactly the same point, like in 2014. So like, I think like in general, everybody kind of, all the technologists in space agree that, we need to go away from this. There's a lot of good properties that proof of work brings, but they're just not worth it having this inefficiency. Now, like, again, if we're talking about sustainability in large, I think, yeah, it's probably a smaller portion of work. But as people grow more conscious, I think it's useful for people to understand that by transacting on these networks and they're contributing to this, right? Pretty much, the more you transact, the more usage it is, the more value they need to be secured, the more value needs to be secured, the higher hash power, the more energy will be used, right? So like that's like every transaction you do, you directly contribute to use more energy kind of by the network. And so like the less people do it, and the more the transition to like clean alternatives that are already here, like the kind of we can make, like using market power, we pretty much can negate that impact.
But as a quick follow-up question, what do you think about the shift to proof of stake, and how far away are we from that in terms of other
We're here.
Well,
that's what I'm saying. Like Near's proof of stake, like a bunch of other blockchains that launched in last 2 years are all proof of stake. And they are, like, as I mentioned, like 20,000 times less energy used per transaction than on Ethereum.
Yeah, so things are improving. Well, that's, and I think yes, it's the problem with it's Bitcoin that's the problem, that can't be changed. But obviously, the traditional industries are getting interested in blockchain and would like to use the advantages of things like smart contracts, for instance, in their supply chains and in their processes. Áslaug, you're doing a startup in this space where the fashion industry is trying to track, say, transparency of the supply chain. Is it the case that the fashion industry is becoming more acceptable and accepting, of blockchain as a way of creating more transparency around sustainability using blockchain?
So I think it's still very early days for the fashion industry in terms of acceptance of blockchain. The fashion industry is actually notoriously slow to change as an industry. But as I mentioned earlier, it's absolutely critical that we tackle the issues there, because the fashion industry is one of the biggest culprits when it comes to negative impact on our environment. There historically has been very limited transparency in the industry in terms of the supply chain. So who is making your product? Where are your fabrics coming from? How are those fabrics being processed? What impact is this having on the environment? And there are some interesting startups now that are tackling this problem using blockchain. We are going to be, we're announcing a partnership with one of them called TruePick. When I launched Katla, we decided to do a little MVP where every item that we create has a unique tracking number on it. And we launched that initially without blockchain support, but we are now going to be adding that through TruePick. And the idea there is that the customer can really analyze what's behind their product, where the fabrics came from, who made it. And by doing this, we can give customers really tools to become more demanding when it comes to the fashion brands they do business with. So the way TruePick will work is that we get all of our vendors around the world, our manufacturers, which are currently actually only in the US, but our fabric suppliers as well, to take images throughout their process. And these images are verified and stored on the chain via TruePick's technology. So we're still a small company with a relatively simple supply chain, but as we grow and as our supply chain becomes more complex, I'm no longer going to be able to visit all of our suppliers. Today, I'm able to visit all of my manufacturers. Soon that's going to change. And then this technology is going to become absolutely critical to relieve us of that task, but still be able to tell our customers the product that we are our shipping to you that we are selling you is in fact sustainably made and in safe working conditions for the workers there. And
is it the case, Áslaug, as a sort of a follow-up point, that there are any particular platforms which the fashion world is gravitating towards? Is it getting deep into more complex things such as decentralized finance and near protocol, for instance, Illia's project, or is it still baby steps?
It's such baby steps. It's funny with an industry that's all about the latest trends and newness, that when it comes to changing the business, it's extremely slow. So most of the industry is still producing products far away from the consumer, months in advance, without any information about what the end consumer is going to buy. This is a big part of the problem, which hopefully on-demand manufacturing will change. And I do actually want to touch a little bit on the on-demand manufacturing, because I think this is one of the biggest impact things we can do in this industry. I mentioned earlier 30 to 40% overproduction every season, which responsive and on-demand manufacturing could solve. And nobody has done this at scale yet. And here, I think blockchain really could help. There's a growing consensus among industry leaders that this is important, and the way that this will eventually work is by creating networks of factories around the world. So when orders come in, you need to find the factory that has capacity, and the factory ideally that is closest to the consumer. And here blockchain could come in to provide incentives for factories to participate, provide incentives for them to have sustainable practices, and then of course to deliver on time and quality product, etc. But I think there's a big opportunity here that has in no way been tackled yet, but I think a clear area where blockchain and fashion can support each other.
Right. Yeah. Thank you. So let's zoom out a little bit and just think about how investors are approaching this. Áslaug, probably you've spoken to investors and whether or not they're interested in what you're doing. Alessandra, can I hear from you a little bit, because you've got investors in your network who have to make investment decisions about whether or not they back technologies which employ blockchain and crypto. Do you see and obviously I know that Top Tier Impact, as the name suggests, is very fascinated and very interested in the impact of investments and looking at whether or not investments can hit the goals of, say, for instance, the global sustainability goals, the UN sustainability goals, society, climate, etc., etc. So from an impact investing perspective, what do some of the investors say to you about blockchain and crypto in terms of their investment strategy? Alessandra.
Yeah, I think that at this point in time, Mike, there is a good understanding of what the core blockchain technology can deliver. And if we zoom back, like you were suggesting for a second, we can see how at the end of the day, this technology is just a revolution in how we organize as humans. And we have massive issues in how that's currently being done from an agency perspective, from like a game theory perspective. And so without going into that discussion in detail, I think that the impact per se of what this technology can do in terms of how all our systems operate in a fair, distributed, collective, I mean, systems enable us to maximize for collective value creation without having all those issues of, but I just want to maximize for my own company or my own interests, right? That you can create an ecosystem where everybody's aligned with each other. So just to set that stage, I think that this is starting to sink in. And so what we see is a range of applications that really concern like trackability, bringing data to the surface, bringing transparency in the industry, blockchain space, clear trades is at the core of how they operate, and they already cover different, large corporates, different industries. So we're really starting to see both from an investor interest perspective and from a corporate adoption perspective. Those two don't always go hand in hand. We're really starting to see much more education. across investments. Yeah.
I see. So investors are not shying away, apparently, from investing in blockchain. Áslaug, are the investors that you speak to, are they enthusiastic about the technology, or are they concerned about the environmental impact, or what sort of things do they say to you?
Yeah, I feel like it's two distinct camps, really. So we definitely do speak to quite a few impact investors, and there's a subset of them that feels that blockchain technology can help us and are very interested in learning about that, how we plan to use it. Others are quite skeptical because of the environmental impact and feel like there's a disconnect between our mission of being a sustainable brand and using blockchain at all. So this is something that we've been trying to figure out. How do we do, and I do believe this problem will be solved. And this, when we look back, this is a temporary glitch and an important technology. But it is certainly an issue for some of the investors we're speaking to. I have not yet come across investors that are making this, central to their investment decision. The impact investors I've been speaking to, none of them yet are making blockchain a central aspect of the investment decision.
Perhaps that might change, of course, though, because as we know, impact investing requires that you literally track the impact of what you're doing, whether it be, sustainability in some way, CO2 emissions. So it's quite a much higher bar than normal tech investing. Illia, do you find that when you speak to investors that they are concerned or have any thoughts about how your technology has a CO2 impact, for instance, or a some sort of sustainability impact? Do they ask those questions of you, or do you feel they should be asking those questions?
I would say they should be, but yeah, I mean, given mostly I'm interacting with crypto investors, so they are definitely less interested in impact kind of these networks, even though I would say a lot of people in the industry are concerned, and you can see a lot more projects kind of starting to be aware of it, and also trying to consider the kind of their own impact, as well as how can they start kind of addressing this. I mean, even at some of the hackathons that other people organized and we've participated, there's an impact track which also tries to explore options how the blockchain in general can be helping across various spaces. And so I think, like, in general, the space, like, the people are interested. I think investors are still too focused on technology and kind of just success. Like, blockchain is still too nascent in a way that, I mean, it has changed over last year, but it's still too new. So I think people are still trying to focus on success versus on kind of longer term viability and sustainability. But I think, like, we as a project and projects we partner with are definitely interested in this. And one of the things we partnered with is a Swiss company called South Pole, which does green forestation and kind of to offset the CO2. And so we actually recently launched a project called Green NFT, which allow like 30 artists to issue NFT tokens, and part of the kind of proceeds, both from primary sale and secondary sale, go directly to South Pole kind of DAO that then funds different forestation projects across kind of Africa and even the United States. And so more and more people are aware, and also through blockchain, they actually have power now to create these platforms and opportunities to actually contribute back and actually become greener, and also maybe even kind of greenhouse gas negative, right? And so I think, like, that's where it starts, and then probably investors will be catching up as, like, more of these projects actually showcase this is possible.
That's a very fascinating point, and what we should be cognizant of is that blockchain and crypto didn't just end with Bitcoin. It continued with Ethereum and lots of other new projects which have come out since. And now, of course, we have this whole new area of NFTs. Certainly on TechCrunch, I recently covered a project to sell a house via an NFT. Now, that doesn't have any immediate sustainability implications, but the fact that you could sell it much more quickly and more easily than traditional finance means that, well, frankly, you just use less energy overall to create that transaction, because it just happens quickly. There's less paperwork, etc., etc., etc. Now, we could even jump into NFTs if you want to, but I'm not sure. But well, let's maybe keep it on sustainability. The other thing that I want to remind everybody, so if you're watching right now, if you're in Hopin, or if you follow me on Twitter at Mike Butcher, ask me a question and I'll put it to our panel, and you can pop that into Hopin. That will be put into our system, or I can ask that question of our panel, or you can even just ask me on Twitter, and I'm monitoring that as well at Mike Butcher. So we've got a few more minutes left, and I'd like to hear from you guys about some of the more exciting things you think that's going to happen in the future in terms of the discussion of how blockchain is going to help deal with the climate crisis, how it's going to affect traditional industries. We've got a representative here from fashion industry, Áslaug, how much bigger it could become. Are there any interesting examples that you've come across in your work where you can see that blockchain is really having a definable impact on issues around climate, around sustainability, around perhaps also society, in fact, or diversity, for instance?
Sure.
Áslaug, can I turn to you first and tell us what some of the things that you think about is going to really exciting towards in the future that you see?
Yeah. No, I think I mean there are a growing number of examples. One company I'd love to mention is Monochain. So one of the in addition to on-demand manufacturing, which I mentioned earlier, one of the important things for us to do to minimize the environmental impact of fashion is to use our clothes more often. So resale of clothing is something that people are looking to increasingly. And one of the big issues with resale of clothing or fashion items in general is the authenticity of the items. So Monochain is one company that has come up with non-visible unique IDs that are put into clothing and fashion items, and allows users to verify that these items are indeed authentic, and shows the whole provenance of the item. And so this is one example of something that's very exciting. The resale market is expected to overtake fast fashion in the coming years, and this is an absolutely critical element of getting there.
Great. And Alessandra, you also, I mean, Top Tier Impact. You, by the way, I think we should give a quick shout out to Top Tier Impact's newsletter, which is extremely good, great aggregator of news about impact tech investing. You probably see lots of interesting things come across your desk into around the issue of blockchain that are, potentially quite exciting. Can you give us any thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Mike, when you mentioned traceability and tracking things, because this is really what impact metrics are there to do. And the reality is that there is a big gap right now in how that's being done. However, the gap needs to be filled for various reasons, both because LPs and funds ask for that, and funds themselves ask for that, impact funds from startups, from companies, and because regulation is coming. So sustainable finance, like the EU regulation, is like the biggest piece of legislation, like since decades. There's so much that is coming to actually make this mandatory. And so, again, it's not just a nice to have, it's something that is going to be enforced across many jurisdictions. So we're seeing a lot of interesting technology there, like tracking and tracing your clean energy footprint as a company, which again, is one of those now proactive and soon to be done type of things. And I think that when you look at the bigger picture and you just keep in mind this amazing functionality, you can sort of look at any industry and see how it can be applied. I'll give you an example. I was watching Seaspiracy a couple of months ago, as many of us have, and all I could see are solutions. I mean, I tend to approach things that way anyway, but for example, the problem of not being able to see with these nonprofits that monitor what's happening on top of, or, you know, with the shipping boats, right, that are fishing, place cameras like all across these boats and then track that data on a blockchain system that can prove and can be monitored anytime, like can prove, right, like that, place chip sensors and a blockchain-enabled system like on fishing nets to make sure that you know who is actually dumping those fishing nets where, since apparently it's a bigger problem than plastic. Plenty of solutions, right? And so I think that this technology, once you understand what it can do, you can look at so many of the issues that we have today and see how it can actually be made better. That's
a fascinating point, yeah. And because of what's called the immutability of blockchains, it means that you could, for instance, you know, could put a pin in a map and show where a fishing net had been dumped, and nobody could ever change that. And that would be very fascinating to aggregate that kind of data. So very important, actually, to make sure that this sort of thing is tracked. Illia, what are some of the exciting future ideas that you think that blockchain could do to help the world deal with the climate crisis and increase its sustainability? And of course, it's been a massive issue at the G7 this year.
Yeah, I think for sure the tracing is a big important question, but I think where the most interesting parts will come from is from creating incentives to be sustainable, or to kind of either by incentivizing consumer to care about it, because like realistically most consumers directly don't until they're like literally exposed to it, or they incentivize to care. And so I think people have been trying different like carbon credits and things like that. So like any ways you can incentivize end consumer to kind of benefit from picking the cleaner option, the sustainable option, or in some way to kind of showcase that they participated in this big emission. I think that's like one big area where a lot of people, some people are already focusing, but we need a lot more focus on. And so kind of pretty much propagating that down to the consumer level. And then same for like businesses, pretty much through that, if they see, more clients, more users because they're incentivized, then they'll start actually, making a change. Otherwise, most of them just care for kind of their short-term profits and are not incentivized to actually start looking. Even if like there's a lot of kind of government oversight, they may still like find the minimal thing they need to do. And so you want them to be pretty much like pressured by their end user, which then they themselves need to have direct incentives one or another. And that's what blockchain is really good at, creating those direct incentives.
So that's a good point, I think, to draw to a close. Illia, so Illia is making the point that consumers themselves, if they're incentivized with crypto, they will put pressure on world leaders in a much more sort of much more robust sense, especially as people move to other kinds of economic systems such as decentralized finance. Alessandra, we've got about a minute left for you to tell us if there are any magic bullets. Do you think that consumers being incentivized in this way will be the magic bullet, or do you have any other thoughts?
I think consumers being incentivized is extreme. Or was it Alessandra? Sorry.
Oh, look, you go ahead, Áslaug. Go ahead. Go ahead. We'll finish with that, Alessandra.
Very quickly. I'll take 30 seconds. I do think consumers being incentivized is an extremely important component. And this all does come also down to transparency. It ties into that, because consumers in my industry do not have the tools today to even know who is behaving well and who is not. So the transparency can work on both ends for the consumers, but also just for industry leaders to put pressure on each other. And there was one other thing I did want to mention, which is on kind of the fabric innovation side, which is currently we have a lot of situations, and this is critical, new fabrics that are sustainable. We have a lot of situations where the big companies are locking the innovators into exclusives, and which of course, prohibits sustainable fabric spreading out to more companies. And here, I think a reward system could be very important that would allow these innovators actually to reap benefits from much more, even smaller brands using these fabrics. But Alessandra, start.
Thank you, Alessandra. Do you think the reward system that crypto and blockchain implies is going to be a big influence on how it contributes to sustainability going forward?
Absolutely. And to be very quick, everybody has to play their role. Public sector is doing it, like I was saying before, with regulation finally. And now the private sector with this amazing technology can enable that as well. And so I expect that we're going to see so much more of this in the next years.
Well, fantastic. I think that was a fantastic run through the potential for blockchain to contribute to the sustainability debate, and perhaps not gets hits quite so much about its effects on the planet from old-fashioned systems like Bitcoin mining, which will probably be around for a while, but are gradually becoming less and less significant, it would appear. But for now, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there. It was a quick run through to 40 minutes through the world of blockchain's impact on sustainability. I'd like to thank our speakers, Áslaug Magnúsdóttir, founder and CEO of Katla, the fashion startup addressing impact with blockchain, Alessandra Sollberger, the founder and CEO of Top Tier Impact, the network around impact investing, and Illia Polosukhin, who's the co-founder of Near Protocol, the one of the newest blockchain protocols addressing decentralized finance. So thank you very much from me, Mike Butcher, editor-at-large, TechCrunch. Thanks very much, everybody, and thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mike. Superb questions. Thank you also again, Áslaug, Alessandra, Illia. It's great to shed some clarity on an issue that's getting so much attention and further highlight really awesome projects in our space making positive change. If I can share my 2 cents, I've noticed a lot of people who take issue with proof of work's electricity consumption actually don't think Bitcoin has value and aren't considering the comparison to the existing impact of the petrodollar, and actually therein often lies the crux of the disagreement. But in any case, there's a lunch break, so grab a snack in the sun if you're in London, and we'll be back at 2 p.m. BST for the first of 2 panels on the data economy. This is the Open Web Forum at CogX, curated by Fabric Ventures, and I'll see you back here in 1 hour and 18 minutes.